My grandson unplugged my oxygen and said, "Let's see if your generation can still breathe." I didn't scream. By Monday, he got a bank notification, and nothing else ever again. But let me tell you how we got there, because the cruelty didn't start that Sunday afternoon in David's living room. It had been building for months, like a storm gathering strength before it destroys everything in its path. I'd been living with my son David and his family for 3 months since my heart surgery. The doctor said I needed supervision during recovery, and David insisted I stay with them instead of hiring a nurse. "Mom, your family," he'd said, his voice warm with what I thought was genuine concern. "We'll take care of you." What I didn't know then was that Tyler, my 25-year-old grandson, saw my presence as nothing more than an inconvenience, a burden, an obstacle between him and what he believed was rightfully his. The house felt different from when I used to visit during holidays. The laughter was forced, the conversations stilted whenever I entered a room. Tyler would roll his eyes when I asked for help reaching something. Before we continue, comment where you're watching from and subscribe to the channel. We'd love to see how far our stories are reaching. Muttering under his breath about old people problems. His girlfriend Jessica would smirk from the couch, never bothering to hide her disdain. My son David worked long hours at the construction company, leaving early and returning exhausted. When he was home, he seemed distracted, always checking his phone or discussing bills with his wife Linda in hushed tones. I noticed the stress lines around his eyes, the way his shoulders sagged when he thought no one was looking. I tried to make myself useful despite the oxygen tube trailing behind me like a tether to life itself. I'd fold laundry, prepare simple meals, anything to prove I wasn't just taking up space. But Tyler made it clear that nothing I did mattered. "Why don't you just go to one of those nursing homes?" he asked one evening while Linda was at book club and David was working late. "You'd have people your own age there. Professional care." I was sitting in what had become my chair, the oxygen concentrator humming beside me like a faithful companion. "I like being with family," I said quietly. Tyler laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Family, right." He was scrolling through his phone, not even looking at me. "You know how much those machines cost to run? The electricity bill went up $60 last month. $60. That's what my ability to breathe was worth to him." The comment stung, but I said nothing. I'd learned over the years that sometimes silence was the best response to cruelty. Tyler took my quiet as weakness, not wisdom. That Sunday started like any other. Linda had gone to her sister's house for the day. David was outside working on his truck, cursing at some stubborn part that wouldn't cooperate. Tyler was in the living room with Jessica, both of them sprawled on the couch watching something on his laptop. I was in my chair, reading a book I'd borrowed from the library, when the conversation from the couch caught my attention. "I'm telling you, Grandma's got to have money stashed away somewhere," Tyler was saying, his voice low but not low enough. "She owned that house for 40 years. Even if Dad thinks she spent it all, there's got to be something left." Jessica twirled a strand of her bleached hair around her finger. "Maybe she's hiding it. Old people do that, right? Don't trust banks?" "My dad's too nice to ask her about it directly," Tyler continued. "But when she's gone, we'll figure it out. The will reading will be interesting." My hands tightened on my book, but I kept my eyes on the page. They were talking about my death like it was an inconvenience they were waiting to get past. "How much longer do you think?" Jessica asked with the casual tone someone might use to discuss the weather. Tyler shrugged. Heart surgery at her age? Could be any time, especially with all those breathing problems. That's when the machine started beeping. My oxygen concentrator had been acting up all week, occasionally making strange noises before settling back into its normal rhythm. I'd mentioned it to David, but he said we'd deal with it Monday. The beeping grew more insistent, and I could feel my breathing becoming labored. I reached for the controls, trying to adjust the flow, but my fingers felt clumsy and thick. "Tyler," I called, my voice barely above a whisper. "Could you help me with this?" He looked over, saw me struggling with the machine, and something shifted in his expression. Not concern, not compassion, something darker. He stood up slowly, walked over to where I sat, and without a word, reached behind the machine and unplugged it from the wall. The humming stopped. The flowing oxygen stopped. The room fell into a silence so complete I could hear Jessica's shallow breathing from the couch. "Let's see if your generation can still breathe," Tyler said, his voice calm and cold as winter morning. I stared at him, this young man I'd once held as a baby, whose scraped knees I'd bandaged, whose birthday parties I'd helped plan. The oxygen tube felt heavy in my nose, delivering nothing but empty air. I could have screamed. I could have called for David. I could have begged. Instead, I looked directly into Tyler's eyes and saw something that chilled me more than the lack of oxygen ever could. I saw a stranger. I saw someone who would watch me die without a single moment of regret. The moment stretched between us like a taut wire. Jessica had gone completely still on the couch, her phone forgotten in her lap. Even she seemed to understand that something irreversible had just happened. But I didn't panic. Maybe it was the lack of oxygen, or maybe it was something deeper. But in that moment, I felt a strange clarity wash over me. This wasn't about my breathing. This was about something much more fundamental. This was about respect, about love, about what family was supposed to mean. And as I sat there looking at my grandson's face, I realized that the family I thought I had was as much of an illusion as the oxygen I was no longer receiving. Tyler reached down and plugged the machine back in. The humming resumed. Oxygen began flowing again. But something inside me had changed forever. Just checking if it was working properly, he said with a smirk that didn't reach his eyes. Wouldn't want anything to happen to you, Grandma. I nodded slowly, my breathing gradually returning to normal. But my mind was racing, processing what had just occurred with the sharp focus that comes from nearly losing everything. Tyler had shown me exactly who he was, and more importantly, he'd shown me exactly what I needed to do. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not because of what Tyler had done, but because of what I'd seen in his eyes when he did it. The complete absence of remorse, the calculating coldness of someone who had already written me off. I lay in the guest bedroom, listening to the house settle around me. David and Linda's muffled voices carried through the thin walls, discussing something in urgent whispers. I caught fragments. Bills, mortgage, can't keep this up much longer, money troubles. That explained the tension I'd been sensing for weeks. Around 2 a.m, I heard Tyler's bedroom door creak open. Footsteps padded down the hallway toward the kitchen. I waited a few minutes, then carefully made my way out of bed, dragging my oxygen tank behind me as quietly as possible. The house was dark, except for the blue glow emanating from the kitchen. Tyler sat at the breakfast table, laptop open, completely absorbed in whatever was on the screen. I stayed in the shadows of the doorway, watching, even from a distance. I could see what he was doing. Online gambling. The screen showed cards, chips, spinning wheels. His fingers moved frantically across the keyboard, placing bet after bet. I watched him lose what looked like hundreds of dollars in minutes, his jaw clenching tighter with each loss. Then he pulled out a credit card. My credit card. The one I'd given David access to for emergencies. The one that was supposed to help with household expenses while I stayed here. Tyler typed in the numbers with practiced ease, like he'd done it many times before. $1,000. Then another $500 when he lost that. My stomach dropped as I realized this wasn't the first time he'd used my card. I backed away slowly, returning to my room with my heart pounding harder than it had during the oxygen incident. My own grandson was stealing from me, had been stealing from me for weeks, maybe months, and David either didn't know, or worse, was letting it happen. The next morning, I called my bank from the privacy of the guest room bathroom while Linda was at work and David was outside. The customer service representative's voice was kind but professional as she pulled up my account. Mrs. Patterson, you've had quite a bit of activity on your card recently. Online gaming sites, mostly. The charges total about $12,000 over the past 3 months. $12,000. My hands shook as I gripped the phone. Can you tell me the dates of these charges? She read them off. Every single one corresponded to a night when I'd thought Tyler was just staying up late watching movies or playing video games. Every time David and Linda had gone to bed early, trusting their son to behave responsibly in the house with his grandmother. Ma'am, if these charges weren't authorized by you, we can start a fraud investigation immediately. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of the decision. Not yet. Let me handle this first. That afternoon, when Tyler came home from whatever job he was pretending to look for, I was waiting in the living room. My oxygen concentrator hummed beside me, a reminder of my supposed helplessness. Tyler, honey, could you sit with me for a minute? He looked annoyed but dropped onto the couch. What's up? Grandma, I was wondering if you could help me understand something. I got my bank statement today and there are some charges I don't remember making. His face didn't change, but I saw his shoulders tense slightly. Old people forget stuff all the time. Maybe you bought something online and forgot about it. Maybe, I said gently, but these charges are to gambling sites. I've never gambled online in my life. The silence stretched between us. Tyler's legs started bouncing, a nervous habit he'd had since childhood. That's weird. Identity theft, probably. Happens all the time to older people. I nodded as if that made perfect sense. You're probably right. I should call the bank and report it as fraud then. Wait, The word came out sharper than he'd intended. I mean, maybe don't do that right away. Sometimes these things work themselves out. Work themselves out? Tyler ran a hand through his hair, and for a moment, he looked like the confused little boy I remembered. But only for a moment. Look, Grandma, I borrowed some money. I was going to pay it back before you noticed. Borrowed. As if taking someone's credit card without permission was borrowing. How much money, Tyler? Not that much, like maybe a couple thousand. I hit a rough patch, but I've got some job interviews lined up. I'll pay it back next month. I looked at my grandson, this young man I'd loved unconditionally for 25 years, and saw a stranger. Not just because he'd stolen from me, but because he was lying to my face without a trace of shame. $12,000, I said quietly. His face went white. That's not, I mean, some of those charges might not be mine. More lies. Always more lies. Tyler, where's your father? At work. Why? Does he know about this? Tyler's eyes darted toward the door, then back to me. Know about what? Does your father know you've been using my credit card to gamble online? The question hung in the air like smoke. Tyler's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. That's when I heard David's truck pull into the driveway. Tyler's face went from white to green. Please don't tell him, Tyler whispered. And for the first time since I'd arrived, he sounded genuinely afraid. He'll kill me. I'm already on thin ice with him about the job thing. I watched my son walk through the front door, tool belt still around his waist, exhaustion written in every line of his face. He smiled when he saw me, that same warm smile he'd had as a little boy. Hey, Mom. How was your day? I looked at Tyler, who was staring at me with desperate, pleading eyes. Then I looked at David, my son who was working himself to death trying to keep his family afloat, who had taken me in when I needed help, who trusted his son to be decent. It was fine, honey. Just fine. Tyler's shoulders sagged with relief, but I wasn't done. David, could you sit down for a minute? I'd like to talk to you and Tyler about something important. David's smile faded. He knew that tone. He knew. Every parent knows that tone. What's going on? I took a deep breath, feeling the oxygen flow steadily into my lungs. I think it's time we discussed some financial arrangements. For everyone's benefit, Tyler's relief evaporated. He knew, just as I did, that everything was about to change. The conversation didn't go the way I expected. It went worse. David listened in stunned silence as I explained about the credit card charges. His face cycled through confusion, disbelief, and finally, a anger that made his hands clench into fists. Tyler sat beside him, shrinking smaller with each word I spoke. $12,000? David's voice was barely controlled. Tyler, is this true? Dad, I can explain. Is it true? Tyler nodded miserably. But I was going to pay it back. I swear I was going to pay it back. David stood up so fast his chair rocked backward. How? You don't have a job. You've been looking for 8 months now. He turned to me, his face flushed with embarrassment. Mom, I'm so sorry. I had no idea. We'll figure out how to pay you back, every penny. That's when Tyler said the words that changed everything. Why does it even matter? She's loaded, and when she dies, we get it all anyway. The silence that followed was deafening. Even the oxygen concentrator seemed to quiet its humming. David stared at his son like he'd never seen him before. What did you just say? Tyler realized his mistake immediately, but it was too late. The truth was already hanging in the air between us. I just meant that Grandma has money and we're family, so you think you can steal from her because she's going to die? David's voice was deadly quiet now. That's not what I said. That's exactly what you said. I watched this exchange feeling oddly detached, like I was observing a play rather than living through it. This was my family, my son and grandson, discussing my death and my money, as if I weren't sitting right there. Mom, David turned to me, his voice thick with shame. I don't know what to say. This is not how I raised him. But even as he apologized, I could see something else in David's eyes. Calculation. The same look Tyler had when he was gambling. David was already thinking about how to handle this, how to manage the situation. Not how to make it right, but how to control the damage. The important thing is that we're family, David continued. We'll work this out together. Tyler will get a job. We'll set up a payment plan. Will we? I asked quietly. David blinked. Of course. Mom, you're family. We take care of each other. Family. That word again. The word they used like a magic spell that was supposed to make everything acceptable. David, can I ask you something? Anything. If Tyler had stolen $12,000 from a stranger, what would you tell him to do? David's mouth opened, then closed. Tyler shifted uncomfortably in his chair. That's different, Mom. This is family. Is it different? The money is gone either way. The betrayal happened either way. But we'll pay you back. With what money? You just told Tyler you're barely keeping up with your own bills. David's face flushed deeper. I could see him struggling, caught between his loyalty to his son and his knowledge that what Tyler had done was wrong. That's when I realized something that broke my heart more than Tyler's theft ever could. David was going to choose Tyler. He was going to find a way to minimize this, to make excuses, to protect his son from the consequences of his actions, just like he'd been doing Tyler's whole life. "Mom," David said carefully, "I know you're upset. You have every right to be. But Tyler's going through a rough patch. He made a mistake, but he's still my son. He's still your grandson." There it was. The choice had been made. Tyler could steal from me, could unplug my oxygen machine, could wish for my death, and David would still protect him. Because that's what fathers do, right? Protect their children no matter what, even if it means sacrificing their mothers. I stood up slowly, my oxygen tank rolling behind me. "I think I need some air." "Mom, wait. I just need to think, David. This is a lot to process." I walked outside to the small patio behind the house, where David kept his tools and Linda grew her tomatoes. The evening air was cool against my face, and for a moment, I just stood there breathing it in through my nose tube. Behind me, I could hear David's voice through the sliding door, low and urgent. "How could you be so stupid? Do you have any idea what you've done?" Tyler's response was muffled, but I caught the tone, defensive, unrepentant. I pulled out my cell phone and dialed a number I knew by heart. "Harrison and Associates, how may I help you? This is Margaret Patterson. I need to speak with Charles Harrison immediately." "I'm sorry, Mrs. Patterson, but Mr. Harrison is with a client. Can I take a message?" "Tell him it's about updating my will. Tell him it's urgent." Charles had been my lawyer for 30 years. He'd handled my late husband's estate, helped me with the sale of our house, guided me through every major financial decision I'd made since Robert died. He knew exactly how much money I had, and he knew how I'd planned to leave it. "Mrs. Patterson?" His voice came on the line 2 minutes later. "What's this about updating your will?" "Charles, I need to make some changes. Significant changes." "Of course. Would you like to schedule an appointment for next week?" "I'd like to schedule it for tomorrow morning." "And Charles, I need you to prepare some other documents as well. I'm going to need a new bank account, new credit cards, and I want to explore options for assisted living facilities." There was a pause. "Margaret, is everything all right?" I looked back through the sliding door, where David was pacing and Tyler sat slumped in his chair like a scolded child. "Everything is about to be much better, Charles. Much better." The next morning, I told David I was going to the doctor for a routine checkup. Linda offered to drive me, but I insisted on calling a taxi. I needed to handle this alone. Charles's office hadn't changed in the 30 years I'd been coming there. Same heavy wooden desk, same leather chairs, same smell of old books and legal documents. But I felt different sitting across from him. Stronger somehow, despite the oxygen tube in my nose. "I want to change my will," I said without preamble. "I want to remove David and Tyler as beneficiaries." Charles set down his pen. "Margaret, that's a significant decision. Are you sure you want to do this?" I told him everything. The oxygen incident, the stolen money, Tyler's casual comment about my death, David's willingness to excuse it all away. When I finished, Charles was quiet for a long moment. "What do you want to do with your estate instead?" "I want to donate most of it to charity. The American Heart Association, maybe. Or organizations that help elderly people who've been abused by their families. And the rest? I have a niece in Oregon, Sarah. She calls me every Christmas and sends me pictures of her children. She doesn't know how much money I have, and she's never asked for anything." Charles nodded, making notes. "And what about your current living situation?" "I want to look at assisted living communities. Good ones. Places where I'll be treated with dignity. This will take a few days to arrange properly." "I understand. But Charles, I want new bank accounts opened immediately. I want my credit cards canceled and new ones issued. And I don't want anyone else to have access to my finances." "What about your current account? The one your son has access to for household expenses?" I smiled, and for the first time in months, it felt genuine. "Leave enough in there to cover this month's expenses. After that, they're on their own." As I left Charles's office that afternoon, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Freedom. Not from my oxygen tank or my health problems, but from the burden of pretending that family loyalty was more important than basic human decency. Tyler thought he was waiting for me to die so he could inherit my money. Instead, he was about to discover what it felt like to lose something he'd never actually had. The changes happened gradually, so gradually, that no one noticed at first. That was exactly how I planned it. On Tuesday, I visited Sunset Manor, a beautiful assisted living community about 40 minutes from David's house. The director, a warm woman named Patricia, gave me a complete tour. Private apartments with full kitchenettes, a dining room that served meals restaurant-style, activities coordinators, a medical staff on site 24 hours a day. And most importantly, a policy of treating residents with dignity and respect. We have an apartment available next month, Patricia told me as we sat in her office. It has a lovely view of the garden, and it's already equipped for residents who need oxygen support. I'll take it, I said without hesitation. Don't you want to discuss it with your family first? I looked out the window at the garden she'd mentioned, where several residents sat on benches reading or chatting quietly. They looked peaceful. Content. Safe. No, I said. This decision is mine. On Wednesday, my new bank accounts were active. Charles had arranged everything with military precision. My old account, the one David had access to, was left with exactly enough to cover the month's household expenses. Everything else had been transferred to accounts that only I could access. On Thursday, I started quietly moving my personal belongings. Nothing obvious, just a few photo albums, some jewelry, clothes I particularly liked. I told Linda I was donating old things to charity, and she was so busy with her own life that she barely looked at what I was taking. Tyler, meanwhile, seemed to think our conversation had blown over. He was back to his usual routine of sleeping late, playing video games, and treating me like furniture. He'd even made a few more attempts to use my credit card, only to have them declined. He assumed it was a temporary banking issue. Friday morning, while David was at work and Linda was at her yoga class, Tyler finally confronted me about the card problems. Grandma, something's wrong with your credit card. I tried to buy groceries yesterday and it wouldn't work. I looked up from my book. Did you try calling the bank? Yeah, they said the card was canceled. They wouldn't tell me why. How strange, I said mildly. Maybe it expired. Tyler's eyes narrowed. All three of them expired on the same day? I hadn't realized he'd been using multiple cards. The theft was even worse than I'd thought. I'll have to look into that, I said. In the meantime, perhaps you could ask your father for grocery money. Dad doesn't have grocery money. That's why we were using your cards. The casual way he said it took my breath away. Not why I was stealing or why I made a mistake. Why we were using your cards. As if it had been a family decision all along. Tyler, those cards were for emergencies. This is an emergency. We need food. I set my book down and really looked at my grandson. When had he become this person? When had he decided that other people's money was his to take? When had he stopped seeing me as his grandmother and started seeing me as just a source of income? Your father has a job, I said quietly. I'm sure he can manage groceries. His job barely covers the mortgage and car payments. You know that. And that's my responsibility because… Tyler stared at me like I'd spoken in a foreign language. Because you're family, because you have money and we don't. There it was again. That word. Family. The magic word that was supposed to erase all boundaries, all personal autonomy, all sense of individual worth. Tyler, do you love me? The question caught him off guard. What? Of course I love you. Why? Why? Because you're my grandmother. But do you love me as a person? Do you enjoy spending time with me? Do you care about my thoughts, my feelings, my well-being? Tyler shifted uncomfortably. That's a weird question, Grandma. Is it? Because love isn't just about blood relation. It's about caring for someone's happiness, wanting what's best for them, treating them with kindness and respect. I treat you fine. Do you? When you unplugged my oxygen machine, were you treating me fine? His face flushed. I was just messing around. You were messing around with my ability to breathe. I plugged it back in. After you'd made your point. Tyler stood up abruptly. Look, I'm sorry about the oxygen thing. Okay? And I'm sorry about the credit cards. But we're still family. And family is supposed to help each other. I watched him pace across the living room. This young man who looked so much like David at that age, who had inherited his grandfather's eyes and his great-grandmother's stubborn chin. All that family DNA, and somehow he'd missed the part about basic human decency. You're right, I said finally. Family should help each other. Tyler stopped pacing, hope flickering across his face. That's why I've decided to help you learn an important lesson. The hope died. What kind of lesson? The lesson that actions have consequences. That stealing is wrong. That threatening elderly people is wrong. That taking someone for granted will eventually backfire. I don't understand. You will. That evening, David came home to find Tyler in a panic about the credit cards. I listened from my room as Tyler explained that all my cards had been canceled, that the bank wouldn't tell him anything, that something was definitely wrong. Maybe Mom's having memory problems, David said, and I could hear the worry in his voice. Sometimes elderly people get confused about their finances. She seemed fine when I talked to her, Tyler said, but she was acting weird, asking me if I loved her and stuff. Maybe I should talk to her. Yeah, you should. And Dad, maybe you should ask her about the will thing too. Like, make sure everything's still set up the way it's supposed to be. I closed my eyes, feeling a familiar ache in my chest. Even now, even after everything that had happened, they were worried about the money. Not about me, Not about my health or my happiness or my well-being, just the money. David knocked on my door a few minutes later. Mom, can we talk? Of course, honey. Come in. He sat on the edge of my bed, looking tired and concerned. Tyler says your credit cards aren't working. I had some issues with fraudulent charges, I said truthfully. I had to cancel them and get new ones. Fraudulent charges? Someone was using them without permission. Gambling sites, mostly. David's face went pale. Mom, about that. Tyler told me he'd been using your cards, but he says he was going to pay you back. With what money? He's looking for a job. He's really trying. I reached over and took my son's hand. David, can I ask you something? Anything. Do you remember when you were Tyler's age? Of course. Do you remember how you treated me and your father? David was quiet for a moment. I was respectful. I worked hard. I never would have done what Tyler did. No, you wouldn't have. So, what's different? I don't know, Mom. Things are different now. Kids are different. The economy is different. But basic morality isn't different, is it? Stealing is still stealing. Disrespect is still disrespect. David squeezed my hand. I know Tyler made mistakes, but he's still my son, and I'm still your mother. Of course you are. Then why does Tyler's relationship to you matter more than mine does? David pulled his hand away. That's not what this is about, isn't it? Tyler steals from me, threatens me, treats me like a burden, and you want to protect him from consequences. But when I try to protect myself, I'm the problem. Mom, nobody said you were the problem. Nobody had to say it, David. You've shown me exactly where I stand in your family's priorities. I could see the conflict in his eyes, the war between his love for me and his protective instincts toward Tyler, and I could see which side was winning. What do you want me to do? He asked finally. I want you to treat Tyler like the adult he is. I want you to let him face the consequences of his choices. And I want you to remember that I'm your family too. David stood up slowly. I'll talk to him again. Will you? Or will you just find new ways to excuse his behavior? He didn't answer, which was answer enough. After he left, I made my final phone call to Patricia at Sunset Manor. I'd like to move in tomorrow, I told her. Tomorrow? That's very short notice. I know, but I'm ready to start my new life. Monday morning came sooner than they expected. Monday morning, I was gone before anyone woke up. The taxi arrived at 6 a.m., just as we'd arranged. Patricia met us at Sunset Manor with a wheelchair and 2 staff members to help move my belongings. By 8 a.m., I was settled in my new apartment, my oxygen concentrator humming quietly in the corner, my few precious possessions arranged on the shelves. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe properly. I'd left a letter on the kitchen table at David's house, short and simple. I've moved to an assisted living facility where I'll be more comfortable. My lawyer will be in touch regarding financial matters. Please don't try to contact me until you're ready to have an honest conversation about respect and family. I didn't leave the address. The first call came at 9:30. David's number flashing on my phone. I let it go to voicemail. Mom, what the hell is going on? Where are you? Call me back immediately. The second call came from Linda 10 minutes later. Her voicemail was less angry, more worried. Margaret, please call us. We're scared something's happened to you. By noon, I had 17 missed calls. I was having lunch in the dining room. Real china plates. Cloth napkins, food that actually had flavor. When my phone rang again. This time it was a number I didn't recognize. Hello? Mrs. Patterson? This is Officer Williams with the police department. Your family has filed a missing person report. Are you safe? I almost laughed. Now they were worried about my safety. I'm perfectly safe, Officer Williams. I've moved to an assisted living facility. I left a note explaining this to my family. They're saying they're concerned about your mental state, that you might have been confused or coerced. I'm 72 years old, not 92. My mind is completely clear. I chose to leave because I was being mistreated in their home. There was a pause. Would you be willing to meet with your family in a neutral location to resolve this? Not at this time. If they'd like to contact me, they can do so through my attorney, Charles Harrison. After I hung up, I sat back in my chair and looked around the dining room. Other residents were chatting quietly over their meals, reading newspapers, some working on crossword puzzles. Normal people living normal, peaceful lives. No one was screaming at anyone. No one was stealing from anyone. No one was unplugging anyone's life support as a joke. This was what normal felt like. Tuesday morning brought a knock on my door. Patricia stood in the hallway with a concerned expression. Margaret, there's a young man here claiming to be your grandson. He's quite upset and demanding to see you. Through my window, I could see Tyler in the parking lot, pacing beside David's truck. Even from 3 floors up, I could see the angry set of his shoulders. I don't wish to see him, I said calmly. He's making quite a scene. Should I call security? Please do. I watched from my window as two security guards approached Tyler. He gestured wildly, pointing up at the building, his voice carrying even though I couldn't make out the words. After a few minutes of heated discussion, he got back in the truck and drove away. Wednesday, Charles called. Margaret, your son has been trying to contact me. He wants to know about your legal affairs. What did you tell him? That I can't discuss your private matters without your consent, but he's quite persistent. He seems to think you've had some kind of mental breakdown. What I've had is a mental breakthrough. Everything I asked you to arrange, is it complete? Yes. Your new will is finalized. All your accounts have been transferred. And I've prepared a document outlining your mental competency should anyone try to challenge your decisions. Good. And the other matter? I've contacted the district attorney's office about the credit card fraud. They're interested in pursuing charges if you decide to press them. I thought about Tyler, about the $12,000 he'd stolen, about his complete lack of remorse, about the way he'd looked at me when he unplugged my oxygen. Let me think about it. Thursday brought Linda. She appeared in the lobby around lunchtime, dressed in her best clothes and carrying a bouquet of flowers from the grocery store. Patricia called to ask if I wanted to see her. 5 minutes, I said, in the community room, with staff present. Linda looked older when she walked into the community room, tired. Her usually perfect hair was slightly messed, and her makeup couldn't quite hide the dark circles under her eyes. Margaret, she said, sitting across from me. We've been so worried. Have you? Of course. You just disappeared. We didn't know if you were hurt or confused or finally fed up with being treated like garbage in my own son's house. Linda flinched. It wasn't that bad, wasn't it? Your son stole $12,000 from me. He unplugged my oxygen machine as a threat. He regularly made comments about wishing I would die so he could inherit my money. And when I tried to address these issues, your husband chose to protect Tyler instead of protecting me. Tyler made mistakes, but he's still family. There was that word again, family. The universal excuse for inexcusable behavior. Linda, let me ask you something. If Tyler had treated your mother the way he treated me, what would you have done? Linda was quiet for a long moment. That's different. How is it different? Tyler's been struggling. He's had a hard time finding work, and he's frustrated. So his frustration justifies stealing from me? No, but Margaret, we're family. We should work through this together. I leaned forward slightly. Tell me honestly, Linda, were you sad to see me go, or were you relieved? Her face flushed. That's not... Of course we were sad. Were you? Or were you just upset about losing access to my money? That's not fair, isn't it? When was the last time any of you asked me how I was feeling? When was the last time anyone in your house treated me like a person instead of a burden? Linda's eyes filled with tears. We care about you. You care about my bank account. There's a difference. She wiped her eyes with a tissue from her purse. What do you want from us, Margaret? What do we need to do to fix this? I looked at this woman who had been my daughter-in-law for 15 years, who had never once stood up for me when Tyler was cruel, who had laughed along with his jokes about my age and health, who had treated my presence in their home like an imposition rather than a privilege. I want Tyler to get a job and pay back every penny he stole from me. I want him to write me a letter acknowledging what he did wrong and apologizing sincerely. I want David to stop making excuses for his son's behavior and start treating me with the respect I deserve. And I want all of you to understand that family isn't just about blood relations. It's about how you treat each other. And if we do all that, will you come home? I shook my head. Linda, I am home. This is my home now. I'm happier here in 3 days than I was in your house for 3 months. Her face crumpled. But we need you. No, you need my money. You've made that very clear. That's not true. Then prove it. Show me that you can care about my well-being without caring about my bank account. Show me that Tyler can act like a decent human being without expecting financial rewards. Show me that David can choose to protect his mother instead of always protecting his son. Linda stood up, her flowers forgotten on the table. I'll talk to them. Good luck with that. Friday morning, I woke up to silence. No angry footsteps above me. No shouting from the kitchen about bills or work or whose turn it was to take out the trash. Just peaceful, blessed silence. I made myself a cup of coffee in my little kitchenette and sat by the window to watch the sunrise. For the first time in years, I felt truly free. That's when my phone rang. Charles, Margaret, you need to know something. Your son has filed a petition claiming you're mentally incompetent. He's trying to get guardianship over your finances. I sipped my coffee calmly. And I've scheduled a competency hearing for next week. Are you prepared for this? I thought about Tyler unplugging my oxygen, about David choosing his son over his mother, about Linda's fake concern and crocodile tears. Charles, I've been preparing for this my whole life. The hearing would be their last chance to control me, and my first chance to show them exactly what they'd lost when they decided I didn't matter. But first, I had a decision to make about those criminal charges. Tyler thought he could steal from me without consequences. He was about to learn how wrong he was. I picked up my phone and dialed the district attorney's office. "This is Margaret Patterson," I said when someone answered. "I'd like to press charges for credit card fraud." The woman on the other end of the line took down my information efficiently. The amount stolen was $12,000? "Yes. That's a felony in this state. Are you sure you want to proceed?" I looked out my window at the peaceful garden below, where residents were starting their morning walks and the staff was setting up chairs for the day's activities. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. Tyler wanted to see if my generation could still breathe. He was about to find out what happened when you tried to suffocate someone who had more fight left than you realized. The competency hearing was scheduled for Tuesday morning at 9 a.m. I arrived 30 minutes early, wearing my best navy dress and the pearl necklace Robert had given me for our 25th anniversary. My oxygen tank rolled quietly beside me, but for once it felt like a companion rather than a burden. Charles met me in the hallway outside the courtroom. "Are you ready for this?" I looked through the small window in the courtroom door and saw them all sitting at the plaintiff's table. David in his only suit, the one he wore to weddings and funerals, Linda fidgeting with her purse strap, Tyler slumped in his chair like a sullen teenager, probably forced to be there by his father. "I've been ready for months," I said. The hearing was supposed to be about my mental competency, but it quickly became something else entirely. David's lawyer, a young man who looked barely older than Tyler, painted a picture of a confused elderly woman making irrational decisions under stress. "Your Honor," he argued, "Mrs. Patterson has abandoned her family home, cut off all contact with her loved ones, and made dramatic changes to her financial arrangements. This behavior is consistent with someone experiencing cognitive decline." Judge Martinez, a woman in her 50s with kind but sharp eyes, listened patiently before turning to Charles. "Counselor, how does your client respond to these allegations?" Charles stood. "Your Honor, I'd like to call Mrs. Patterson to testify on her own behalf." The walk to the witness stand felt like the longest journey of my life, but when I sat down and looked out at the courtroom, I felt perfectly calm. The oxygen concentrator hummed beside me, and I took a deep breath before beginning. "Your Honor, my name is Margaret Patterson. I'm 72 years old. I have congestive heart failure, and until 6 months ago, I believed that family meant unconditional love and support. I told the whole story. The recovery period at David's house, Tyler's escalating cruelty, the oxygen incident, the stolen money, David's refusal to hold his son accountable. I didn't leave because I'm confused," I said, looking directly at my son. "I left because I finally understood that staying was killing me faster than my heart condition ever could." When I finished, the courtroom was silent. Judge Martinez made some notes before looking up. "Mrs. Patterson, you mentioned that your grandson used your credit cards without permission. Have you reported this to the authorities?" "Yes, Your Honor. Criminal charges are pending." Tyler straightened in his chair, his face going pale. David's lawyer whispered something urgent in his ear. "Your Honor," the lawyer said, standing quickly, "my clients were unaware that criminal charges were being pursued. Perhaps we could discuss a resolution that would be beneficial to all parties." Judge Martinez's expression didn't change. "This is a competency hearing, Counselor, not a mediation session. Mrs. Patterson, I'd like to ask you some questions to assess your mental state. For the next 20 minutes, she asked me about current events, my medical care, my financial arrangements, my daily routine at Sunset Manor. I answered every question clearly and thoroughly. Finally, she set down her pen. "Mrs. Patterson, in my opinion, you are one of the most mentally competent people who has appeared in my courtroom this year. Your decision to leave an abusive living situation shows wisdom, not confusion. Your financial planning demonstrates responsibility, not incapacity." She turned to David's table. "The petition for guardianship is denied. Furthermore, I'm ordering a 30-day restraining order preventing any member of the Patterson family from contacting Mrs. Patterson without her explicit consent." David shot to his feet. "Your Honor, she's my mother, and she's an autonomous adult who has the right to decide who she wants in her life." Judge Martinez replied firmly. "This hearing is adjourned." As I gathered my things, I could hear urgent whispers from David's table. Tyler was arguing with his father, his voice rising above the appropriate courtroom volume. "This is all your fault," he hissed. "If you hadn't filed this stupid petition, she might not have pressed charges." "Keep your voice down," David snapped back. "Why? It's not like things can get any worse." That's when Charles leaned over to whisper in my ear. "Actually, they can." 2 weeks later, Tyler was arrested. I wasn't there when it happened, but Linda called to leave a voicemail describing the scene. The police arriving at the house early in the morning. Tyler's shock when they told him he was being charged with felony fraud. The handcuffs, the neighbors watching from their windows. "He's just a kid, Margaret." Linda's voice was thick with tears. "He made a mistake. But he doesn't deserve to have his life ruined over this. A mistake. Even now, they were calling it a mistake. The trial was scheduled for 3 months later. In the meantime, Tyler tried to contact me through various relatives, mutual friends, even the staff at Sunset Manor. Everyone who would listen heard the same sob story. He was sorry, he'd learned his lesson, he just needed one more chance. I gave the same response to everyone. If Tyler truly understood what he did wrong, he would be focused on making amends, not avoiding consequences. Meanwhile, my new life was flourishing. I joined the book club at Sunset Manor, started taking a watercolor painting class, and become friends with several other residents. Eleanor, who lived down the hall, had escaped from her own toxic family situation and understood exactly what I'd been through. The hardest part, she told me one evening as we sat in the garden, is accepting that they'll never change. They'll always see us as the problem, never themselves. She was right. Even as Tyler's trial approached, the messages I received focused on my cruelty, not his crimes. How could I destroy my own grandson's future? How could I tear apart the family? How could I be so vindictive? The trial lasted 2 days. I testified about the stolen money, the pattern of disrespect, the oxygen incident. Tyler's lawyer tried to paint him as a victim of economic hardship and family stress. The jury deliberated for less than an hour. Guilty. Tyler was sentenced to 18 months in prison and ordered to pay full restitution. As the judge read the sentence, I saw David put his head in his hands. Linda was crying. Tyler just looked stunned, as if he still couldn't believe there were actual consequences for his actions. I felt no joy in his conviction, but I felt something else. Something I hadn't experienced in years. Validation. A room full of strangers had listened to my story and agreed that what Tyler did was wrong, that I deserved better, that my dignity mattered. After the trial, David caught up with me in the courthouse hallway. "Mom, please, can we talk?" I stopped walking and turned to face him. He looked years older than he had 6 months ago. The stress of Tyler's arrest, the legal fees, the shame of having his family's business aired in court, it had all taken its toll. "What would you like to say, David? I'm sorry. I'm sorry I didn't protect you. I'm sorry I made excuses for Tyler. I'm sorry I chose him over you." I studied his face, looking for signs of manipulation or self-pity. Instead, I saw genuine remorse. "Are you sorry because Tyler's in prison? Or are you sorry because you finally understand how badly you treated me?" David was quiet for a long moment. "Both, but mostly the second one. What changed your mind? Living without you. Trying to manage everything Tyler destroyed without your help. Seeing how my neighbors look at me now that the whole story came out." He paused, and talking to Linda's mother. That surprised me. "Betty?" She asked me how I would feel if someone treated her the way Tyler treated you. If someone stole from her and threatened her and I just made excuses for it. David's voice cracked slightly. I realized I'd become the kind of man I used to despise. We stood in the courthouse hallway for several minutes, saying nothing. Finally, David spoke again. "I know I don't deserve forgiveness. I know I lost the right to call myself your son when I chose Tyler over you, but I want you to know that I understand now, and I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to become the kind of man you raised me to be." I reached into my purse and pulled out a card. "This is the number for Dr. Sarah Hendricks. She's a family therapist who specializes in toxic relationships and enabling behaviors." David took the card, looking confused. "If you're serious about changing, you'll call her. You'll do the work to understand how you became someone who could watch his mother be abused and do nothing. And maybe, if you prove that you've actually changed, we can have a conversation about what our relationship might look like going forward. And Tyler? Tyler is an adult who made adult choices. He'll serve his time, and hopefully he'll learn from it. But his consequences are not my responsibility anymore." David nodded slowly. "I'll call the therapist." "Good." I turned to walk away, then stopped. "David, I loved you boys more than my own life. But love without respect is just enabling. I won't enable anyone ever again." 2 years later, I celebrated my 74th birthday in the garden at Sunset Manor. Eleanor had organized a small party with some of our friends from the community. The staff had made a beautiful cake, and Patricia had arranged for a small string quartet to play. It was perfect. As I was opening gifts, a staff member approached with an envelope. "This came for you today, Mrs. Patterson." Inside was a card from David. Not asking for anything, not making excuses, just acknowledging my birthday and updating me on his progress in therapy. He'd been going twice a week for 18 months. Tyler had been released from prison and was working at a construction company. paying back the restitution slowly, but consistently. The card included a photo of David at a construction site wearing a hard hat and safety vest, smiling genuinely for the first time in years. On the back, he'd written, "Learning to build instead of enable. Thank you for teaching me the difference. Love, your son David." I set the card aside and looked around the garden at my chosen family. These people who cared about my happiness, who treated me with dignity, who saw my worth beyond my bank account. My oxygen concentrator hummed quietly beside my chair, and I took a deep breath of the evening air. Tyler had tried to see if my generation could still breathe. Turned out we could breathe just fine once we removed the people who were suffocating us. I was home, I was happy, I was free, and I was still breathing perfectly well on my own.